Hey guys, CrumbleBob here in Minecraft again, ready with more Reddit stories. I'll be honest, it took me some time to choose today's batch, because they're rough, emotional, and pretty harsh. Family betrayal hits harder than anything else. So grab a blanket, relax, and let's dive into this world of disappointment together. My husband, 34M, and I, 32F, attended a large family gathering held at my in-laws' house, where his entire extended family, including aunts, uncles, and cousins, was present. These gatherings happen regularly, occurring several times a year. For important context, everyone in my husband's family knows I have a very serious food allergy, which is life-threatening for me. Even a tiny amount of the allergen can trigger anaphylaxis, a fact they've known for many years, as the allergy isn't new and I've had it since childhood. Due to this significant health risk, I've always made it a practice to bring my own food to these gatherings. I prepare my own meals in the safety of my own kitchen, using my own utensils and containers to ensure absolutely no chance of cross-contamination. My mother-in-law, Mill 60F, has previously commented on this arrangement, implying my caution makes things complicated or that I'm being overly careful. Several times she's tried to persuade me to sample a little of the food she cooked, claiming she'd been careful, but I've always had to politely decline her offers. My husband is entirely supportive on this matter because he truly understands the serious nature of my condition. So, last Saturday, we arrived at my in-laws' house, and I carried my container with my prepared meal. I placed it on the kitchen counter a little distance from all the other dishes, which is my usual practice. People were mingling and chatting around us while my MIL was occupied with her main dishes. My father-in-law, Phil, 62M, was also in the kitchen at the time and saw me set my container down, first looking at the container, then at me, but remaining silent. A little later, when people were starting to line up and make their plates, I went back to the kitchen to get my food, only to discover my container was missing. I looked around the counters, thinking someone might have simply moved it to another spot. I asked my husband if he had seen it, but he hadn't. Next, I asked my MIL if she had moved my special dish, but she just waved her hand dismissively while serving a casserole, telling me she was busy and hadn't touched it. By this point, I began to feel a bit worried, knowing I truly couldn't eat anything else offered at the party. I then noticed my FIL standing near the trash can, and he had a strange expression on his face. I walked over to him and calmly asked if he had happened to see my food container. He looked me directly in the eye before pointing toward the kitchen trash can, very calmly informing me that he had thrown it away. I was completely stunned and asked him why he would possibly do that, reminding him that he knew I couldn't eat anything else and that I needed that specific food. He only responded by saying he had his reasons, and that it was for the best, offering no further explanation for his action. I stood there utterly speechless until my husband came over to ask what was wrong. When I informed him that his dad had tossed my food in the trash, he too was shocked and instantly demanded a reason from his father. Phil simply reiterated the same vague statement about having his reasons for doing so. By this point, some other family members were beginning to notice that something was unfolding in the kitchen. Since the house featured an open-plan layout, people in the adjacent dining area started looking over to see what the fuss was about. I wasn't shouting, but my voice was steady as I informed Phil that his conduct was unacceptable and that he had no right to discard my food. I ended up explaining once more, even though he already knew, that it was the only thing I could safely consume. It was then that MIL approached to ask what the commotion was about. After someone explained that Phil had discarded my food, her instant reaction was to tell me I was overreacting and that it was merely a bit of food. She even implied I could likely find something she'd cooked that I could eat. I had to state firmly that no, I could not, and that she was fully aware of this fact and the gravity of the situation. My husband supported me entirely, telling his dad he needed to explain himself immediately. Even so, Phil declined to offer a reason, appearing very uncomfortable as he simply repeated that he had done what he believed was right. I observed him glance at MIL for a moment as he spoke. I told Phil that his actions were entirely out of line and that, without a genuine reason, what he did was simply a cruel act. As this unfolded, some family members began whispering among themselves. I overheard an aunt comment that I was making a big deal out of nothing, while a cousin proposed that Phil likely had a good reason and I should just trust him. I responded by stating that I couldn't imagine any good reason for what he had done. Eventually, I informed my husband that I wished to leave. I was too angry and distressed to remain there, particularly with nothing I could consume and after being treated so poorly. My husband agreed with me, and as we were collecting our belongings to depart, Phil displayed a very conflicted look on his face. Conversely, Emile was accusing me of spoiling her party and being overly dramatic, asserting that I always created problems with my food issues. We departed soon after. My husband was upset with his father, but also very bewildered by his strange behavior. I am equally perplexed, as I don't grasp why Phil would do something so out of character. He has always been a quiet and sensible man, so this action came as a complete shock. So, Reddit, am I the jerk for getting upset and leaving after Phil discarded my food without explaining why? I believe my reaction was justified considering the seriousness of my allergy and the circumstances, yet how some family members and my MIL responded made me question if I could have acted differently. Update 1 a few days later. First, I want to express my gratitude to everyone who commented and sent messages. The support has been immense, and the common agreement that I was NTA made me feel less as though I was losing my mind. I wanted to begin by clarifying a few points that people have been asking about in the comments. Many of you questioned why my husband wasn't right by my side immediately, or why I didn't simply depart the moment I noticed my food was gone. Events unfolded very quickly. My husband was speaking with his cousins in the other room when I entered the kitchen, and he approached as soon as he detected the tension in my voice. I didn't depart immediately because I was honestly just in shock. The thought of my Phil, who has always been a quiet and gentle individual, acting this way was so uncharacteristic that I truly believed there had to be a peculiar explanation, and I wished to comprehend it before merely storming out. I also need to clarify the background with my MIL, as many people inquired if she was always this problematic. While she has consistently made passive-aggressive remarks about my allergy and what she terms my pickiness, she had never acted so aggressively or overtly before. Her irritation was something we had grown accustomed to handling, but this incident was quite astonishing, hence our initial confusion. Now, regarding what has occurred since that day, the last few days have been an absolute whirlwind, and I still struggle to comprehend what has unfolded since that day. The morning after the unfortunate family gathering, my husband called his dad, stating very clearly that he needed to promptly account for his actions. He emphasized that discarding my food was intolerable, and that his continued silence was creating a significant issue between all of us. On the phone, Phil sounded quite upset and asked if he and my husband could speak privately. My husband consented and visited Phil at their house when Emile was scheduled to be out with her sister. They convened for roughly an hour, and when my husband returned home, he appeared pale and was noticeably unsettled. He had me sit down and cautiously recounted what Phil had told him. According to my husband, Phil began their conversation by apologizing for the awkward manner in which he had managed everything at the party, confessing he had panicked. He then disclosed the true reason he had thrown away my food. He clarified that he had witnessed MIL interfering with my food container mere moments before I went to the kitchen to get it. He detailed seeing her open my container and introduce something into it from a small, transparent bag, holding a type of powder or pulverized material. He saw her swiftly sprinkle it into my meal and stir it in before shutting the lid. Right after seeing this, Phil quietly confronted MIL in the utility room, while I remained unaware in the other room. When he inquired what she had placed in my food, she at first denied doing anything whatsoever, but when he pushed her for the truth, she reportedly broke down and confessed to adding a small quantity of my allergen to my meal. She admitted to him that she wished to test if my allergy was genuine, as she evidently believed I was overstating it for attention or simply to be troublesome. She had also remarked about me needing to develop a tolerance. Phil was utterly horrified by her admission. He told my husband that he was paralyzed in that instant, uncertain of what action to take. He was concerned that if he publicly accused MIL, she would cause a huge scene and deny everything or attempt to manipulate the narrative to her benefit. Simultaneously, he was anxious that I might inadvertently consume the tainted food before he could reach me if he didn't intervene at once. So, in what he could only term a moment of sheer panic, his answer was to seize my container and toss it straight into the trash, making certain I could not eat it. He had planned to explain everything to my husband and me in private later, but the situation worsened far sooner than he had expected. As my husband told me all of this, I was overcome with nausea and couldn't speak for several minutes. The thought that Mill would purposely try to make me ill, to knowingly cause a potentially fatal allergic reaction, was truly terrifying. It's one thing for her to be upset or offer passive-aggressive remarks, but this was a vicious act of betrayal that I just cannot grasp. My husband was enraged by his mother. He told Phil that while he now grasped the reason for throwing the food away, his father should have told us right away, or at least taken me aside privately to warn me. Phil seemed to agree with this and was deeply regretful for how he had managed the disclosure, reiterating that he was simply so shocked by what his wife had done. Later that same evening, Phil called me directly to offer a heartfelt apology for throwing away the food without explaining right away. He then personally told me what he had seen Mill do, and he sounded worn out and truly sorry. He believed he needed to protect me, but admitted he had done it in an awkward and upsetting manner. Phil then inquired if the three of us, he, my husband, and I, could visit the following day to speak with Mill there. He said that he wished for her to confront us and confess what she had done. Despite my dread, I knew it was something that needed to happen, so we agreed. The next day, we arrived at their home, finding both Mill and Phil present. The mood in the room felt extremely strained. Phil started the discussion by declaring he had an important matter, wanting Mill to hear before she shared the truth herself. He then described in precise, explicit detail what he had witnessed her do to my meal. Once he concluded, he faced her and asked her to clarify for us why she had done it. Mill's response was utterly volatile. Though she began weeping, it seemed like tears of fury instead of regret. She did not deny placing the allergen in my food. Rather, she commenced shouting and shifting blame. She yelled that I was the issue, that my allergy rendered everything too hard for her, and that she was weary of accommodating my requirements. She charged me with being overly sensitive and excessively demanding, even proceeding to accuse me of attempting to estrange her from her own son. She asserted that she simply wished to see if I was pretending, and maintained that a small amount would not have harmed me significantly. A declaration that is perilously false, since even a minute quantity could be fatal. My husband entirely lost his composure at that point, a pronouncement that is gravely incorrect, as even a tiny portion could be deadly. My husband utterly lost his patience at that juncture, telling her she was unbelievable and that she might have killed me. He asked her if she had any understanding of the seriousness of her actions, but she simply kept crying and yelling that it was my fault for being the way I am, asserting that I had forced her to do it by being so challenging. During her whole outburst, Phil stayed very silent, simply gazing at her with a cold, hard look on his face. When she finally calmed down into weary sobs, Phil spoke, informing her that he no longer knew the person she had turned into, and that her deeds were unpardonable. There was no apology ever offered to me from Mill. Not one word of regret was expressed for her actions, just blame and accusations. I stated plainly to her that her deeds were cruel and perilous, and that I could not ever trust her again, and wished for no further involvement with her. She reacted by beginning to yell that I was the one dismantling the family and pitting her son and husband against her. It was a genuinely dreadful and unpleasant scene, and we departed shortly thereafter. My husband told his mother that he required distance and could not communicate with her at present. I have no clue what happens next. Though my Phil appears to support us, he remains wedded to this woman. My husband is utterly repulsed by his mother, and I am still attempting to comprehend the dreadful reality that my mother-in-law deliberately attempted to hurt me. This has gone well past a straightforward IDA question and into a waking nightmare. Update 2, a week later. It's been just over a week now since Phil's disclosure about Mill's effort to taint my food and the unpleasant clash that ensued. Instead of getting better, things appeared to be actively worsening. After departing their home that day, my husband and I chose to establish a firm, no-contact policy with Mill for the immediate future. My husband called Phil to notify him of this choice, explaining that while we are grateful he spoke the truth, we cannot engage with Mill until she genuinely recognizes the seriousness of her deeds and consents to pursue professional assistance. Even then, I frankly cannot picture ever wishing to be near her again. Phil told my husband he grasped our stance and sounded extremely weary and sad over the phone. He stated that the circumstances at his home were dreadful, relaying that Mill was either giving him the silent treatment or accusing him of wrecking everything. Fortunately, Mill has not attempted to reach me personally. She has, however, been incessantly reaching out to my husband with numerous, lengthy, disjointed text messages. In these texts, her demeanor fluctuates wildly between pretended weeping, harsh allegations, and obvious efforts to make him feel guilty. She has charged him with deserting her and has asserted that I have somehow manipulated him. She persists in downplaying her deeds, reiterating that she intended no true injury and was simply exasperated by my requirements. Update 2, a week later. It's been just over a week now since Phil's disclosure about Mill's effort to taint my food and the unpleasant clash that ensued. Instead of getting better, things appeared to be actively worsening. After departing their home that day, my husband and I chose to establish a firm, no-contact policy with Mill for the immediate future. My husband called Phil to notify him of this choice, explaining that while we are grateful he spoke the truth, we cannot engage with Mill until she genuinely recognizes the seriousness of her deeds and consents to pursue professional assistance. Even then, I frankly cannot picture our ever wishing to be near her again. Phil told my husband he grasped our stance and sounded extremely weary and sad over the phone. He stated that the circumstances at his home were dreadful, relaying that Mill was either giving him the silent treatment or accusing him of wrecking everything. Fortunately, Mill has not attempted to reach me personally. She has, however, been incessantly reaching out to my husband with numerous lengthy, disjointed text messages. In these texts, her demeanor fluctuates wildly between pretended weeping, harsh allegations, and obvious efforts to make him feel guilty. She has charged him with deserting her and has asserted that I have somehow manipulated him. She persists in downplaying her deeds, reiterating that she intended no true injury and was simply exasperated by my requirements. There is no sign that she comprehends how perilous her deeds were, as she keeps penning things like, "It was merely a tiny bit," and "you know your wife overstates matters." My husband has managed this quite effectively, either not replying to her messages or responding very concisely to state that her grasp of the circumstances is inaccurate and that he will not talk about it further until she accepts accountability. These replies from him typically just provoke another flood of angry or tearful messages from her. The extended family has now learned of what transpired because Phil seemingly felt compelled to inform his siblings of the truth after realizing that Mill was circulating a wholly distinct account of the occurrences. We learned from my husband's aunt, Phil's sister, that Mill had been informing people that Phil had misconstrued the circumstances. She asserted she was merely attempting to impart some taste to my unseasoned food, and that I had overreacted and initiated a major dispute, which led to Phil mistakenly siding with me. We also discovered that she has been informing some kin that I have munchausen, or that I'm feigning the entire allergy for notice. Phil's sister is appalled by Mill's deeds and has been extremely supportive, telephoning me to convey her shock and inform me how regretful she is that we are enduring this. She conceded that Mill has consistently been rather challenging and self-absorbed, but this conduct is beyond anything she could have conceived. She also verified that Mill has been phoning everyone in the family, weeping and frantically attempting to get people to support her. At the same time, Mill's sister, who is my husband's other aunt, is evidently backing Mill unconditionally. She has been phoning my husband to tell him he is being unkind to his mother, asserting that Mill is a wreck and that we are overstating the entire situation. She even dared to state that I should have been more empathetic to Mill's strain, entertaining and managing my specific needs. My husband ultimately had to end the call with her, and she rejected sensible discussion. Several days prior, the situation intensified when Mill appeared unexpectedly at our apartment while my husband was working. I was doing my job remotely and noticed the doorbell chiming repeatedly. When I peered through the door viewer and identified her, I refrained from opening the door. She then started pounding on the door and shouting my name, weeping that she merely wished to converse so we could resolve this. I stayed quiet, expecting her to depart. After roughly 10 minutes of pounding and calling out for me, she began shouting, exclaiming that I lacked compassion and that I was ruining her family, and that this was entirely my fault. My neighbor across the hall opened his door to ascertain the source of the disturbance, and when she noticed him, Mill scowled momentarily before resuming her weeping, informing him that I prevented her from seeing her son, a falsehood, as he wasn't even present. She eventually departed after my neighbor warned he would contact building security. The entire ordeal left me feeling rattled, as if I were a captive in my own home. I promptly telephoned my husband, who was incensed that she had arrived at our home. He subsequently contacted his father, who appeared distressed upon hearing what occurred. Phil mentioned that Mill had rushed out of their house earlier, stating she intended to resolve matters with me. He expressed regret for her conduct, clarifying that he had attempted to restrain her, but she was utterly unreasonable and refused to heed. The strain from everything is tremendous and is impacting both my husband and myself. It's affecting my slumber and my capacity to focus on my job. There is no prospect of reconciliation whatsoever, and it seems this situation will only intensify. Update 3, 2 weeks later. It has now been 3 weeks since the first occurrence at the family get-together, and the situation has persisted in worsening exactly as I dreaded. After Mill's disturbing visit at our apartment, where she created a commotion, my husband conveyed to her a very explicit and conclusive message. He informed her that her conduct was wholly unacceptable, that she was prohibited from visiting our home or my workplace uninvited, and that any further harassment would oblige us to look into our legal options. He reaffirmed that we would maintain no contact with her until she accepted full accountability for the poisoning attempt and sought professional assistance for her conduct. She never responded to that message. Phil has been in intermittent contact with my husband, and he sounds increasingly fatigued with each call. He admitted to my husband that living with Mill has become intolerable, describing her as alternating between long periods of moody silence, dramatic weeping episodes where she insists everyone is against her, and abrupt outbursts of anger where she screams about how I have ruined her life and her marriage. He mentioned she still declines to acknowledge any true fault concerning the food situation, continually altering her account. Sometimes she disputes it occurred, Other times, she concedes it, but asserts it was innocuous. And at other times, she says I merited it for being so troublesome. He also noted with apprehension that she has been consuming considerably more alcohol than usual. Last week, a further public event transpired. Phil and Mill had been invited to a modest dinner gathering at the residence of some longtime family friends. These friends were seemingly cognizant of the overall circumstances, as Phil had previously shared details with the husband. According to Phil, who related the account to my husband afterward, Mill remained subdued and reserved for the initial portion of the evening. Nonetheless, during a discussion concerning family and grandchildren, Mill abruptly broke down crying. She then commenced a lengthy, boisterous rant before all the other guests, proclaiming that her life was destroyed. She accused me of a lengthy, boisterous rant before all the other guests, proclaiming that her life was destroyed. She charged me with being a malevolent individual who had intentionally sought to ruin her family from the instant I encountered her son. She asserted I had been feigning my allergy for years, simply to gain notice and to complicate her life. She maintained that I had alienated both her son and her husband from her, uttering dreadful remarks about my disposition. In an odd shift, she then began discussing how she was a good mother and a good wife who merited none of this. The hosts were reportedly profoundly uneasy as Phil attempted futilely to pacify her. When he sought to intercede, she shoved him aside and persisted in yelling, uttering outlandish claims that lacked substantial coherence. He ultimately had to physically escort her from their friend's home, with her resisting and yelling at him throughout the journey to the vehicle. He was profoundly mortified by the incident and apologized extensively to their friends. The following day, those friends called Phil to express their concern for him, adding that they were shocked by Mill's conduct and the terrible things she had said about me, as they have known me for years and were well aware of my allergy. After this public meltdown, Phil told my husband that he simply couldn't do it anymore. He said that after being married to Mill for nearly 40 years, he felt he no longer even knew her. He loved her, or at least the woman he thought she was. But her actions toward me, coupled with her refusal to take responsibility, her constant lies, her emotional instability, and her increasingly erratic conduct, had shown him a side of her he could no longer live with. He informed my husband that he has decided to separate from Mill and has already spoken to a lawyer to understand his options. His plan is to ask Mill to move out of their home, and if she refuses, he will find another place to live. My husband was very quiet after hearing this news. While he is sad about the end of his parents' marriage, he told me he understands his father's decision because his mother's conduct has become indefensible. He is also very worried about how Mill will react when Phil formally tells her about the separation. I am feeling a strange mixture of emotions about this development. On one hand, I feel validated that Phil is taking such a definitive step, as it acknowledges the severity of Mill's actions. Conversely, I am overcome with a feeling of apprehension, concerned that this will enrage Mill even further, and that she will fault me even more for the collapse of her marriage. No tranquility can be found in this circumstance, only an unceasing condition of crisis. I foresee no favorable result from this. It's merely a matter of damage limitation and endeavoring to safeguard our own peace as much as feasible. Update 4. A month later, Phil relocated from the family residence approximately 3 weeks ago, confirming to us that his discussion with Mill regarding the separation was not amicable, which appears to have been a significant understatement. He characterized her response as evolving from disbelief to pleading and then to menaces. Evidently, she hurled objects and yelled at him for hours, and he stated he eventually had to depart while she was in one of her fits of fury because he was genuinely apprehensive about what she might do. He is currently residing in a compact, rented apartment and has formally initiated divorce proceedings. He informed my husband that it was the most difficult choice of his life, but he sensed he had no alternative, as Mill's conduct since he departed has only affirmed that he made the correct one. She has evidently been telephoning him incessantly, leaving a series of voicemails that fluctuate between tearful entreaties for him to come back and irate accusations, encompassing threats to financially devastate him. As I apprehended, Mill is unequivocally and wholly faulting me for the divorce. She made this frighteningly evident approximately 2 weeks ago when I received a letter at our apartment. It was from her, handwritten and several pages in length. My husband was with me when I opened it, and we were both horrified by its content. The letter was brimming with sheer animosity and ceaseless denunciations, labeling me with all manner of foul epithets. She charged me with systematically conspiring to ruin her marriage from the very initial day I encountered her son. She asserted my fabricated allergy was my chief instrument for manipulating everyone and portraying her as an undesirable person. In one especially unsettling passage, she referred to me as a cuckoo in her nest who had displaced her own child, alluding to my husband siding with me and had now successfully displaced her husband too. The letter unequivocally declared that the dissolution of her marriage was entirely my fault, and cautioned that I would receive my just deserts. The whole letter was so deranged and unsettling that we have opted to retain it, purely in the event we require it for legal purposes later on, such as for a restraining order, if her conduct persists in escalating. My husband was repulsed and enraged after perusing what his mother had penned. He contacted Phil at once to apprise him of the letter, and Phil was not astonished by its contents. He stated that Mill has been dispatching comparable messages to him and to other family members in an endeavor to turn them against both of us. Phil once more counseled us to preserve any and all communications from her as proof. He also stated that Mill has outright declined his proposals to cover her therapy, or for them to engage in mediation to resolve the divorce. She is evidently insisting that he halt the divorce proceedings right away and regain his judgment. In a further escalation, Mill has attempted to reach my husband via his workplace. She telephoned his office number repeatedly, weeping to the receptionist, and asserting there was a family emergency that necessitated her speaking with him immediately. His company maintains a policy against personal calls, but she was so persistent and seemed so distraught that the receptionist connected her to his line on one occasion. My husband was in a meeting at that moment, and when he received the message and recognized it was her, he had to direct the receptionist to no longer transfer her calls, briefly clarifying that it was a challenging personal circumstance. He was greatly mortified to have this drama extend into his professional life. Some of Mill's family members, particularly her sister and a couple of her cousins, have now entirely severed contact with my husband. They have sent him messages informing him that he has betrayed his mother by preferring his manipulative wife over his own family, echoing Mill's assertions that I am the exclusive source of all these issues. It has grown evident that Mill has been quite successful in her smear campaign within her side of the family. Fortunately, there have been no further instances of physical aggression from Mill since she pounded on our door, but her emotional and verbal assaults persist. The vibe surrounding our lives is simply dreadful. My husband is mourning the demise of his relationship with his mother and the conclusion of his parents' marriage. Phil is endeavoring to proceed with the divorce and consults with his attorney frequently. He appears older and profoundly sorrowful whenever we see him, but he stays firm in his decision. He has conveyed his remorse to us repeatedly for not recognizing or tackling Mill's deeper problems earlier. He also still experiences considerable guilt for how he initially managed the situation at the party, even though he was acting to safeguard me. We have consistently assured him that we comprehend he was in an untenable predicament. In a minor, somber manner, the relationship between my husband and his father has grown stronger through this mutual ordeal, as they are lending each other aid. But the extended family is broken irrevocably. Family gatherings, which were once at least a bearable aspect of our lives, are now utterly inconceivable. The harm that Mill has inflicted, initially with her effort to injure me, and then with her consequent conduct, is profound and extensive. Let's move on to the next story. I am a 33-year-old man. My connection with my family, particularly my parents and my 31-year-old sister Jenna, isn't close. We don't talk often, and for a long while I've accepted this as the usual state of affairs. There are reasons for this separation which stem from events that occurred many years ago. For over a decade, I haven't been asked to or gone to any family get-togethers, including holidays, weddings, or other important events. This has been a shared understanding, unsaid but evident. Lately, something shifted. My sister Jenna and her husband Mark welcomed a son last year. Some weeks ago, I got a formal invitation by mail. It was for my nephew's first birthday celebration. The invite came straight from Mark. I recognized his handwriting from a thank you card he'd sent once for a wedding present I'd mailed years earlier. Getting the invite was unforeseen. I read it multiple times to ensure I wasn't mistaken. It was addressed to me, and it was for a family occasion. After thinking about it for a few days, I chose to go. I figured that maybe enough time had gone by. I wasn't expecting a warm greeting or a sudden shift in our family dynamic, but I believed appearing was the proper thing to do. Mark had made a gesture by sending the invite, and I felt I ought to respond to it positively. I went online and ordered a present for my nephew, a collection of classic children's books. I also put in a request for the day off from my job, and it was approved. I didn't mention the invitation to anyone as I saw no need. I just got ready to go. About a week before the party was set to happen, I got a call from my mother. We hadn't spoken on the phone in years. I answered, and she started talking without the usual pleasantries. She spoke in a flat, direct tone. She informed me the invite I'd received was an error. She explained that Mark had sent it without checking with Jenna beforehand. She said that Jenna was uncomfortable with me being at the party. My mother went on, saying my presence would cause tension and that it would be better for everyone if I didn't show up. She said she was calling to prevent any awkwardness on the day of the party. She wasn't yelling or emotional, yet her words were very firm. She wasn't asking, she was telling me the situation. I listened to all she had to say without interrupting. When she was finished, I didn't argue or ask any questions. I simply said, "I understand." Then I hung up. Right after that, I went to the website where I'd ordered the gift and canceled it. The refund went through the next day. Then I opened my phone's contacts. I found my mother's number and blocked it. I then did the same for my father's number and Jenna's number. I felt no anger. I simply felt a final boundary had been established, and there was nothing more to add. A few days later, I started getting emails from my father. His first email was brief and puzzled, inquiring why his calls weren't connecting. When I didn't respond, he sent another. He stated that my mother had informed him I was now declining their calls. He said I was acting childishly and being needlessly harsh to my mother. He asserted she was merely attempting to mediate and avert a challenging circumstance. He wrote that my choice to block them was an excessive reaction, and that my conduct was why our family was so divided. He concluded the email by insisting that I unblock their numbers right away and phone my mother to apologize for my unfriendly actions. I haven't responded to any of his emails, and I don't plan to. I've shifted them to a distinct folder in my inbox. To my mind, the matter is straightforward. They made it plain that I'm not wanted. I've accepted their stance. By blocking their numbers, I'm simply making the current separation a clear one. I don't see the value in keeping open communication with people who deliberately shut me out from the family. They appear to think I should be accessible to them whenever they choose, but that I should stay unseen when they don't want me present. I don't agree with these conditions. So, Ida, for cutting off my parents and making our long-standing estrangement official and permanent? Update 1. I want to express my gratitude to those who have commented and shared their opinions. The general agreement appears to be NTA, but many have noted that a bigger narrative exists here. They are right. I didn't include the complete background in my initial post because I sought judgment on my current deeds, not on earlier events. However, I grasp why people require additional details to comprehend the circumstance. I will now offer that background. I'm not seeking pity. I merely wish to present the facts as they unfolded. This dates back 15 years to when I turned 18. My sister Jenna was 16. Around then, she began acting quite secretive. She'd be out late, and she was constantly texting on her phone. I didn't give it much thought initially, but I eventually discovered she was involved with a man considerably older than her. He was about 21 or 22. Our parents were quite strict, and I knew they wouldn't approve of this relationship in any way. My involvement in this was minor. I wasn't my sister's parent. I was occupied with my own life, holding a part-time job to save funds and preparing to begin college that autumn. I did talk to her about it once. I informed her she was taking a significant gamble and ought to be cautious. I didn't threaten to inform our parents, as I believed it was her life and her choice. Nonetheless, my stance shifted one evening when I returned from my work. It was past midnight, and I discovered her just as she was attempting to slip back into the house via a window. I confronted her at that moment. I wasn't loud or aggressive. I informed her that her conduct was growing perilous, and that she couldn't keep lying to our parents to this extent. I said she had to tell them about her boyfriend, or I'd be forced to. I worried for her safety. I presented her with an ultimatum. I stated she had until the weekend's end to talk with them. If she didn't, I would inform them of what I knew on Sunday night. I believed I was acting responsibly as her older brother. The weekend passed. She didn't speak with them. On Sunday afternoon, my parents requested I sit with them in the living room. They both appeared quite serious and pale. Jenna sat on the sofa beside them. She had been weeping. My father informed me that Jenna had shared something very grave. My mother then stated that Jenna had leveled a terrible accusation against me. My sister, gazing at the floor, had told them I had been sexually abusing her for many years. I was stunned. I instantly denied everything. I attempted to clarify the situation for them. I recounted her secret boyfriend and the ultimatum I'd given her. I argued that she was doing this to divert their attention from her own secrets and to undermine my credibility so they wouldn't trust anything I uttered. They declined to listen. My words appeared to have no impact. My mother started to cry, and my father told me I was sick. They didn't believe me. They fully believed her. They instructed me to go to my room, pack a bag with my essential belongings, and leave their house. After I had done so, they informed me that they had already called the police. What followed was the complete destruction of my life. I was an 18-year-old high school student one day and an accused felon the next. I was arrested that evening. Because I was legally an adult and she was a minor, the system was not on my side. My family offered no support. I had to rely on a public defender. The case became a matter of her word against mine. There was no physical evidence to support her claim, but there was also no evidence to disprove it. The entire case was built on her testimony. In court, she was a very compelling witness. She cried. She provided a detailed, fabricated narrative of abuse. When my lawyer tried to bring up her relationship with the older man as a possible motive for the lie, the prosecution framed it as an attack on her character, a classic example of victim blaming. It made me look even more guilty. My own parents testified against me. They spoke about how my personality had changed, how I had become sullen and withdrawn in the months leading up to the accusation. They interpreted my normal teenage behavior as a sign of guilt. They accepted her account because it was what they desired to believe. In the end, I was not convicted of the gravest charge, but I was found guilty of a less severe felony sex offense. The judge gave me multiple years of probation, and most importantly, I was required to register as a sex offender. That registration requirement pursued me everywhere. My college plans vanished as I was unable to secure student loans. Securing a job became extremely challenging. Most applications inquired about a felony conviction, and being truthful typically concluded the discussion. Finding a place to live was equally tough, with limitations on my proximity to schools, parks, or playgrounds. For 5 years, I was required to check in at the local police station on a regular basis. I had to notify them of my address, my workplace, my vehicle, any online accounts I used. My life was an open book to law enforcement. After the trial, my entire family stopped all contact with me. Aunts, uncles, cousins, grandparents. It was as if I had ceased to exist. I served my time on probation. I completed the 5 years on the registry. I began to live a very quiet, isolated life. I found work in a warehouse where the background check was less stringent. I found an apartment in a compliant area. I built a life for myself, one that was small and self-contained. I never attempted to contact my family again. This is the history that led to the current situation. This is why receiving an invitation to a child's birthday party was so jarring. It is also why being disinvited was not a surprise, and it is why I feel no guilt for blocking their numbers. From my perspective, there is no relationship left to salvage. There has not been one for a very long time. Update 2. Something occurred that I never could have expected. A few days after I posted my last update, I received a phone call from a number I did not recognize. My first instinct was to ignore it, as I often do with unknown numbers. But for some reason, I answered. The man on the other end of the line had a voice that sounded professional. He introduced himself as a private investigator. My mind immediately went to a negative place. I assumed my parents had hired him, perhaps to find some new way to harass me or to collect information to use against me in some way. I was ready to hang up the phone. I informed him I wasn't interested in talking with him. He promptly said, "Please, just grant me a minute. I am not employed by your parents." That gave me pause. It didn't make sense. Why would my sister's husband engage a private investigator and then have him reach out to me? The investigator appeared to grasp my confusion. He clarified that Mark had employed him several months prior. Mark had grown increasingly worried about Jenna's conduct during their marriage. He characterized her as exhibiting patterns of dishonesty. She would fabricate elaborate falsehoods about trivial matters. She was susceptible to sudden and explosive outbursts of anger. They would have massive, dramatic disputes that appeared to arise unexpectedly. Mark sensed that something was fundamentally amiss, but he could not pinpoint the origin of the issue. The private investigator clarified that his initial task was to perform a thorough background check on Jenna and to examine some of her financial and social activities. Mark's main apprehension at the time was that she might be involved in an affair. The investigator carried out his assignment. He investigated her entire life, both present and past. Naturally, his inquiry led him to the occurrences that took place when she was 16, the allegation that had shaped my life for so long. This is where the narrative takes a direction that I still find challenging to grasp. The investigator informed me that during his digital forensics work, he managed to retrieve data from an old cloud storage account that Jenna had previously used as a teenager and had completely forgotten. Contained within this cloud account were records of past message conversations from an instant messaging application she and her friends used at that time. He had located a particular discussion. It was between Jenna and her best friend back then. The conversation had timestamps. It unfolded during the 3 days between when I gave her the ultimatum and when she made the accusation to our parents. The investigator then started reading parts of these messages to me over the phone. I listened quietly. Jenna's messages revealed her panic. She wrote to her friend that I had discovered her secret about her older boyfriend. She was frightened that I would inform our parents and that her life would be ruined. Her friend inquired about her next move. Jenna's response was explicit. She wrote that she had to take a drastic step, something that would guarantee our parents would disregard anything I spoke. She needed to turn me into the foe. Then she detailed her strategy with unnerving precision. She told her friend she would inform our parents I had touched her. She called it the perfect plan. She figured that it was such a grave accusation that no one would ever doubt her, and that it would resolve her issue by having me taken out of the house and out of her life. She explicitly wrote that this would protect her secret relationship. After reading these portions to me, the investigator informed me that he had presented his full findings, including the complete transcripts of these messages, to Mark several days prior. He mentioned Mark was utterly devastated. He had been married to Jenna for 4 years. They had a child together. Everything he believed he understood about his wife had been constructed upon a basis of falsehoods. The investigator stated that Mark wished to speak with me personally. He mentioned Mark was profoundly sorry for what had occurred and that he desired to assist. He provided me with Mark's personal cell phone number and urged me to phone him. I concluded the call with the investigator and remained in silence for an extended period. It was a great deal to absorb. After roughly an hour, I chose to dial the number he had provided me. Mark answered on the initial ring. His voice sounded strained and weighty. The initial words he uttered were, "I'm so sorry." He reiterated it repeatedly. He informed me he had no knowledge of any of it. He mentioned that he had always sensed that something concerning the account of her past was amiss. Jenna would grow intensely angry and defensive whenever he attempted to raise the topic, so he had learned to cease inquiring. He informed me without wavering that he trusted me. He also clarified the circumstances with the birthday party invitation. He said he had sent it because he had a hunch that something was amiss with the family's account about me, and he wanted to try to create an opening, even a small one. When Jenna discovered he had sent it, she had a total breakdown. She yelled at him for hours and threatened to leave him and take their son if he ever tried to contact me again. That was the event that prompted him to hire the private investigator. The call lasted for nearly 30 minutes. He concluded by vowing to send me the complete transcripts of the messages and any additional evidence the investigator had found. He said he would assist me in any possible manner, including giving testimony for me to ultimately vindicate my name. I'd quote to think about it. Update 3. The happenings after my discussion with Mark have been rapid and conclusive. As he promised, he sent me via email the full, uncensored transcripts of Jenna's conversations, along with a thorough report from the private investigator. Perusing the messages wholly was an unworldly experience. It was not emotionally impactful for me in the manner people might anticipate. There was neither anger nor sadness. It was just a chilling affirmation that I had understood to be factual for 15 years. This served as the evidence. Mark phoned me once more a day later. He told me he had faced Jenna. He narrated the scenario to me. He had waited until their son was asleep, and then he sat her down and gave her printed copies of the messages. He mentioned that her first reaction was denial. She charged him with falsifying the documents. She shrieked that he was plotting with me to destroy her life. She grew hysterical. Mark stated he stayed calm and merely indicated the evidence, declining to engage with her accusations. When it grew clear that her anger and denials were ineffective, her approach changed. She broke down. She started to weep uncontrollably, and amidst her tears, she confessed everything. She acknowledged that she had fabricated it all. She attempted to vindicate her actions, stating that she was merely a frightened 16-year-old girl who did not wish to get into trouble. She asserted she did not grasp what the repercussions of her falsehood would be. Mark remarked her admission felt less like true regret and more like a last, desperate effort to earn his sympathy. The discussion did not conclude there. It intensified. When Mark informed her that he could no longer be wed to her, she grew violent. She then physically assaulted him, striking and clawing at him. He had to physically hold her back to prevent her from harming herself or him further. After she wore herself out, he exited the room, secured himself in their home office, and contacted his lawyer. The following morning, he formally initiated divorce proceedings. He also requested an emergency order to obtain temporary exclusive custody of their son, referencing Jenna's confession, her history of manipulation, and her violent instability as reasons why she was an unsuitable parent. The repercussions spread rapidly. Mark, in a move he characterized to me as essential for complete openness and responsibility, transmitted the investigators' full report, including the message transcripts, to our parents. Their reaction was swift. My father repeatedly called my phone, but it was blocked. The following day, my parents showed up at my apartment building. I had no idea how they found my address, but I presumed the public information from the sex offender registry I was on enabled it. I was at home. They rang my apartment number for several minutes, and when I received no reply, they just stood in the lobby and began speaking loudly at my door. My mother was weeping. Her words were distinct through the door. She wasn't weeping for me or for the 15 years of my life that had been taken. She was weeping for Jenna. She lamented about how Jenna's life was now destroyed. She pleaded with me through the door to speak with Mark. She desired me to persuade him to halt the divorce proceedings. She stated that I needed to find it within myself to pardon Jenna so that our family could start to mend. The notion was preposterous. They expected me, the victim of the falsehood, to repair the harm caused by its disclosure. I didn't reply. I sat on my couch in silence and waited. After nearly an hour, they finally gave up and left. Once they were gone, I made a phone call. I contacted a recommended lawyer who specializes in wrongful convictions. I met with him the following day. I provided him with all the evidence Mark had sent me. My lawyer reviewed everything. He told me with a high degree of confidence that we have an incredibly strong case to have my conviction formally vacated. The legal process to do so has already begun. I have not spoken a single word to my parents or my sister. Final update. Several months have passed since my last update. A number of things have been finalized, and I feel I should provide one last post to close this chapter. There will be no more updates after this, because the story has reached its conclusion. On the legal side, events unfolded as my lawyer had predicted. We petitioned the court to vacate my conviction based on the new evidence. The prosecutor's office reviewed the case and did not oppose our motion. The confession in Jenna's text messages was undeniable. There was a hearing which was brief. I attended, but I was not required to speak. The judge formally overturned the conviction and vacated the judgment against me. My name has been removed from the sex offender registry. Legally, the crime I was convicted of no longer exists on my record. It's as if it never occurred. Jenna's life has changed completely. Her divorce from Mark is final. As part of the settlement, and because of the evidence of her behavior, Mark was given primary physical and legal custody of their son. Jenna has restricted, supervised visitation rights. Mark keeps me updated from a distance, as he feels he owes me that. He tells me that Jenna is undergoing some form of intensive therapy, but she continues to place blame for her situation on everyone but herself. The situation with my parents has also ended. They are, from what Mark has told me, completely focused on supporting Jenna. They have spent a considerable amount of their savings on her legal battles and her present living expenses. As for me, my life goes on. I am legally free from the conviction that has loomed over me for 15 years, but there has been no moment of release. There was no good feeling when the judge's gavel dropped. I did not feel a sudden rush of relief. The past is not erased. The years I spent on probation and on the registry happened. Anyway, there are no more updates to share. Thank you to everyone who has taken the time to read this. This next one will make your jaw drop. My sister Anna, who is 3 years older than me, was married 5 years ago to a truly great guy whom we'll call Derek. Derek's family has a fair amount of money, so while they are not hugely rich, they are quite comfortable, and he is also a successful professional who earns a solid income himself. My sister, in contrast, has never truly focused on building a career for herself, having had some part-time jobs prior to meeting Derek, but she never had any significant savings or long-term plans to speak of. Her interests always leaned more towards social activities and living for the moment, which is certainly her decision to make. When she and Derek opted to get married, his parents were very involved in the planning, and they were covering a major portion of the wedding, while also assisting them with a down payment on a house. Due to this financial involvement, their attorneys recommended that a prenuptial agreement would be a prudent decision. Derek was quite gentle when he raised it with my sister, explaining that it was primarily a measure to protect his family's assets and his own prior savings, and he described it as just a typical procedure for his family. The prenup basically stipulated that in the unlikely event of a divorce, they would each depart the marriage with the assets they entered it with. Any wealth accumulated jointly during the marriage would be divided between them, but his inheritance and existing family wealth were to be excluded. The agreement also contained a very clear infidelity clause, which specified that if either of them was unfaithful, the unfaithful party would not be entitled to any form of spousal support or any share of the assets accumulated during the marriage. My sister was quite unhappy about the prenup at the time, and their discussions about it led to many arguments. My mom even got involved in the dispute, telling my sister that she found the whole idea to be insulting. Throughout this entire process, I chose to stay out of it completely, as I believed it was their relationship and therefore their decision to make together. In the end, my sister did sign the agreement because she wanted the big wedding and the comfortable lifestyle that came with being married to Derek, so she agreed to his family's condition. For 5 years, their life together seemed perfect from every angle. They lived in a beautiful house and were able to travel quite a lot, and my sister never had to work because Derek was very good to her and paid for everything. He bought her a nice car and made sure she had a generous allowance for whatever she wanted, making it look like a very happy marriage to anyone who saw them. He always seemed to love her very much, and he was consistently kind and respectful to our family, including me. I have always been more of a quiet and reserved person, and I have a stable job in a technical field that I have worked very hard for. While I do not earn a huge amount of money, I am very careful and responsible with it, so I have been saving aggressively for years with the goal of buying my own small apartment. This has been my single biggest focus in life, and my family knows this well, so they are fully aware that I have a substantial amount of money saved up. About a month ago, this entire situation completely blew up in a terrible way. My sister went out with some old friends from her hometown, and during the evening, she ended up meeting her high school ex-boyfriend at a bar. One thing apparently led to another, and she ended up spending the night with him. She was not discreet about her actions at all, and someone who knows both her and Derek saw them together, who then told Derek's friend, who then proceeded to tell Derek. There was simply no way for her to deny what had happened, and when he confronted her, she admitted it to him. Derek was, by all accounts, completely devastated by the news, and he asked her to pack a bag and leave their house that very same day. He told her in no uncertain terms that he would be filing for divorce immediately, remaining completely firm on his decision because he said he could never trust her again. My sister then came to my mom's house in an utter state of distress, crying and declaring that her life was over. For the past month, my mom's house has become the focal point of all this drama, while my sister has been staying there, spending her days contacting lawyers and desperately seeking a way to contest the prenup she voluntarily signed. This brings me to what happened last night, when my mom and sister sat me down for an extremely serious discussion. They explained to me that the lawyers my sister has consulted have all conveyed the same message, which is that the prenup is exceptionally robust and unassailable, especially with the explicit infidelity clause. They said that contesting it in court would be prohibitively expensive, and the likelihood of success was exceedingly low. My sister has no personal funds to finance such a legal battle, as she has absolutely no savings, despite the ample allowance Derek had given her for years, because she used it all on apparel, salon appointments, and meals with her friends. My sister then explained that her sole remaining choice was to engage a highly aggressive and costly lawyer who professes to specialize in disputing these types of agreements. She told me this lawyer believes there might be a slight, remote possibility to contend for some form of settlement, but it would require a protracted and complicated court fight to even try. Then they finally reached the core of our discussion, when my sister informed me she required $50,000 for the legal retainer and the forthcoming fees for this attorney. She looked directly at me, with my mom seated right beside her and nodding in agreement, and she requested that I provide her with the funds for my personal savings. I remained there for a moment, just to ensure I had understood them accurately, as I could scarcely believe they wished me to hand over the money I had saved for my apartment, the very funds I had labored for every single day for the past 10 years. They expected me to turn it over to my sister so she could attempt to obtain money from her husband, the man she had been unfaithful to. I refused. I stayed very calm and composed when I simply stated, "No, I am not going to do that." The response to my denial was immediate and incredibly explosive. My sister began screaming at me and labeling me selfish, shouting that I had always been envious of her and that I was pleased to witness her suffering now. She insisted that she was my sister and that family members were meant to assist one another, regardless of the circumstances. My mom promptly chimed in, telling me that I had an obligation to my sister and that I had ample money saved, while my sister possessed nothing. She claimed I was being heartless and that I was abandoning her in her greatest moment of need, even going as far as to state that this was entirely Derek's fault for having such a terrible prenup initially, portraying my sister as the victim. I did not argue back with them, and instead, I just reiterated that my answer was no. I told them that my savings were for my own future, and that I would not be using them for her legal fees. I also stated that her situation was a direct outcome of her own actions, because she signed the prenup, and she was the one who was unfaithful. These were her choices, and I would not be the one bearing the consequences of those choices. I then rose from my chair and departed my mom's house, and since that moment, my phone has been inundated with an endless stream of calls and texts from both of them. It has also broadened to include some of my aunts, who have only heard my sister's emotional and one-sided account of the story. They are all labeling me selfish and unsupportive for my decision. I have not responded to any of them, and I feel as though I am living in a crazy world. I am the one who worked diligently and was responsible, while she is the one who made a terrible error and is now facing the repercussions she agreed to in writing. Yet somehow I am being portrayed as the villain in all of this. So, Reddit, Ida, for refusing to give my sister the money I saved for my own home to fund her divorce battle. Update. 1. I want to thank everyone who commented on my initial post, because it was incredibly helpful to realize that I am not entirely crazy for thinking the way I do. I have read many of the comments, and the judgment appears to be overwhelmingly NTA, for which I value the clarity. I still have not interacted with my family since the major blow-up, but the situation has regrettably continued to worsen, so I thought I should post an update to share what has been happening since then. After I left my mom's house that night, the angry texts and calls persisted for 2 continuous days without stopping. The messages were not solely from my mom and sister Anna, because my mom had clearly contacted her sisters, my aunts, and had given them a very one-sided and emotional version of the events. As a result, I received lengthy messages from 2 of my aunts, telling me how profoundly disappointed they were in me. They said that Anna had made a mistake, but insisted that Derek was being cruel by throwing her out with nothing. They lectured me that family is all we have and that I should be there for my sister, with one of them even saying that money is just paper, but family is forever. It is very easy for them to say such things, since none of them have offered Anna any personal funds, and they just expect me to be the one to provide it. I chose not to respond to any of these texts, and instead set my phone to silent, as I had to focus on my job, and the constant alerts made it impossible. Following roughly 48 hours of this continuous barrage, the messages finally ceased, and I thought they might have given up and would leave me alone. I was very wrong because the quiet was just a prelude to them trying a new strategy. A few days ago, my sister Anna made a long and emotional post on her social media profile. She didn't use my name directly, but it was very obvious to anyone who knows us who she was talking about. She wrote a long, sad story about how she was going through the worst time of her life, detailing being heartbroken and abandoned by those closest to her. Then she included a specific part about how some family members, who you would think would be your biggest supporters, can turn out to be the most selfish people of all. She went on by writing about how some people hoard their money and would rather watch their own family drown than offer a helping hand. And she ended it with a vague sentence about how you really learn who your real family is during hard times. Many of her friends who were unaware of the full story left comments full of support for her, writing things about how she was so strong and how awful it was that she was being treated this way. Some of our shared acquaintances who follow both of us have been looking at me oddly lately, and I know it is because they saw the post. My sister has always been very good at playing the victim, which is a skill she has been perfecting our whole lives. When we were children, if she broke something, she would cry so convincingly that my parents would end up blaming me for upsetting her, and this feels like the adult version of that same conduct. The social media post was irritating, but I knew I could ignore it. What occurred next, however, was much harder to disregard. Last night, my mother appeared at my apartment building unannounced. I live in a secure building, so you need to be buzzed in to gain entry, and around 8 p.m. my intercom rang, revealing it was her. She had not called me beforehand to say she was coming. She simply appeared on my doorstep. I did not want to let her in, but simultaneously I did not want her to create a scene in the lobby for all my neighbors to witness, so I buzzed her up. The moment she entered my apartment, she started in on me again. But she did not yell this time, instead employing a different tactic. She was crying as she told me that Anna was not eating and was crying all day long, and she asserted she was concerned about Anna's mental health. She said that I was being unfeeling and that my unwillingness to assist was driving Anna to her breaking point. She told me that Derek had formally served Anna with divorce papers and had already canceled all of her credit cards, making her entirely reliant on my mom, who is retired and lives on a set income. She then spoke about my savings again, stating things like, "You have all this money just lying dormant in a bank account, while your sister is suffering at this moment. You can always make more money, but you only have one sister." I attempted to clarify to her that the money was not merely sitting there, but that it was the outcome of years of personal sacrifice. I reminded her that I never took vacations, I don't acquire expensive items, and I have worked extra hours whenever feasible, all to establish that fund for my future stability. Her attitude shifted immediately when I said that, and the crying ceased as her expression hardened. She told me that our father, who died a decade ago, would be disgraced by my self-centeredness, stating he always prioritized family above all else. She then charged me with believing I was superior to them merely because I had a better job and had accumulated my money, and she said that I was disparaging my sister. The conversation just repeated itself from there, but I held firm and told her my choice was definitive. Eventually, she grew very angry again and began pointing to items in my modest apartment, like my television and my laptop, implying that I could sell those things if I truly wished to assist. The sense of entitlement she exhibited was genuinely astonishing, as she truly believes that my personal belongings constitute a family resource pool that she and my sister ought to have unrestricted access to. I eventually grew tired of the circular argument and informed her that I was finished with the discussion and that she had to depart my residence. She outright refused, remaining on my sofa and declaring she would not depart until I consented to help my sister. I then informed her that if she did not depart, I would have no alternative but to contact building security. It was then that she finally rose. She approached me, and for a moment, I genuinely believed she might become physical. Instead, she simply came very close to my face and informed me that I would regret this, whispering that when I am elderly and solitary with my funds, I would recall this moment and grasp what I had forfeited. Then she turned and departed, forcefully slamming the door behind her. I have since blocked my mom's and my sister's phone numbers, and I also blocked my aunts who were sending me messages. I understand this is a significant move to make, but I feel like I have no other my mom's and my sister's phone numbers, and I also blocked my aunts who were sending me messages. I know this is a significant move to make, but I feel I have no other choice because they will not respect my boundaries and the pressure will not cease. I am concerned about what they will attempt next, as the social media post and my mom appearing at my apartment feel like a significant escalation. I feel this is just the start of a longer struggle, and while I am not altering my stance about the money, I am beginning to realize that my relationship with my mom and sister might be permanently broken because of this. Update 2. It has now been a few weeks since my last update, and I believe that blocking their numbers and having that final confrontation with my mother would be the end of the harassment. I was quite naive to think that, because the situation has since worsened in unforeseen ways, and it has now directly affected my professional life. After I blocked their numbers, I had about a week of blissful peace, a calm period where I could attend work, return home, and concentrate on my personal life. I began to feel that I could finally progress past this entire situation, but then the emails began. They must have understood their phone numbers were blocked, so they simply switched to an alternative method of contact to reach me. The first email was from my sister, Anna, and it was a long and disjointed message that was a peculiar blend of accusations and begging. She wrote that Derek's lawyer had sent her own lawyer a letter, which formally stated their intention to enforce the prenup to its fullest extent, meaning she would be receiving absolutely nothing. The letter also made it clear that they had conclusive proof of her infidelity, so there was no point in even attempting to contest that fact. Her email went on to say that her lawyer was now dropping her as a client because she could not pay the initial retainer fee, and she was clearly panicking. She accused me again of abandoning her and said that I was siding with Derek against her. She wrote that I had no idea what it was like to have your whole life pulled out from under you, conveniently neglecting to mention that she was the one who pulled the pin on the grenade. The email ended with another forceful demand for the $50,000, which she called her last chance to get any kind of justice. I did not reply to the email, and instead I created a filter to send any future emails from her, my mom, or my aunts directly to a separate folder that I do not check. Emails from her, my mom, or my aunts directly to a separate folder that I do not check. A few days after that email, I was at work. Around 11 a.m., I was in the middle of a meeting with my team when one of the receptionists came over and quietly told me that I had a visitor waiting in the lobby. I was not expecting anyone, so I was confused. And when I got to the lobby, I was completely shocked to see my mother sitting there. I had never told my mother the precise name of my present employer, but I suppose she discovered it somehow. I approached her and asked what she was doing here, ensuring my voice remained quiet because the receptionist was directly at the desk. My mom rose and started speaking in a loud, theatrical voice for everyone to hear. saying that she was here because her daughter was in a dreadful crisis and her other daughter was unwilling to assist. She asserted that she was unsure what else to do and that she was feeling desperate. My face was flushing with humiliation as a few of my colleagues who were passing by paused to observe the developing scene. I attempted to guide her out of the lobby, but she jerked her arm free from me and began weeping loudly. She told me that Anna would soon be without a home, and that I was sitting here in my upscale office, acting as though my family didn't even exist. I told her that this was utterly inappropriate, and that she had to depart at once. But she just faced the receptionist and asked, "Can you believe it? Her own sister is in distress, and she refuses to even help. What kind of person does that?" I was utterly mortified, so I escorted her to the door and practically had to force her out of the building. She stood on the sidewalk just outside the glass doors and gazed at me with a look of pure anger. I returned to my meeting and tried to act like nothing had happened, but it was impossible. My boss approached my desk later that day to ask if everything was okay, and while he was very professional about it, it was clear that the incident had caused a significant disruption. I just told him it was a private family matter and assured him that it would not happen again. That evening, I was so angry I could barely think straight, as showing up at my job was a line I never thought even she would cross. It was such a clear and manipulative attempt to use public shame to get what she wanted. The following day, things managed to get even worse when Anna somehow found my work email address. She sent an email not only to me, but she also copied in my boss, whose email is listed on the company website and the general HR email address for the company. The email she sent was a complete and utter fabrication of the truth, in which she wrote that I was withholding family funds that were supposed to be shared between us after our father passed away. She alleged that I was financially misusing my role as the supposed executor of his will, which is not true, as misusing my role as the supposed executor of his will, which is not true, as I am not, and never was the executor of anything, and was leaving her destitute. To make her story more persuasive, she included a copy of the divorce filing from Derek's lawyer to demonstrate her desperate situation, portraying me as an unfeeling, conniving thief who was stealing from her own sister. This created a significant problem for me at work, and my boss summoned me to his office immediately with an HR representative, and they had her email printed and placed on the table. They were quite serious, as they informed me that these were very grave accusations and that the company needed to take them seriously for legal reasons. I had to explain the entire distressing situation to them. I had to present them with the text messages and the earlier emails from Anna and my mom to demonstrate the long pattern of harassment and to prove that the story in her email was entirely untrue. I had to clarify that no family funds existed and that the money was my own personal savings from my salary. My boss and the HR representative were eventually understanding, as they could discern from the evidence that I was the victim of harassment. However, they told me firmly that I had to ensure this family drama did not extend into the workplace again. They recorded the incident, and while they guaranteed me it would not impact my job, it is now part of my permanent employee file. I was compelled to have a lawyer issue a formal cease and desist letter to both my sister and my mother, insisting that they cease contacting me at my workplace. The stress from all of this is immense, because my sister didn't merely try to embarrass me. She deliberately attempted to harm my career and my professional standing. This was no longer concerned with seeking help from me. This was plainly about seeking revenge. Because she couldn't obtain my money, she chose to try and damage my ability to make money for myself. I am now investigating my legal options if this harassment continues, because I am nearly certain it will. Update 3. Hello again. Much has transpired since my last update, where I described the dreadful incident of my mother appearing at my workplace and my sister emailing my boss. The legal letter I sent appeared effective for a brief period, as the emails and direct contact ceased for a while. However, the conflict has now escalated into something physical, and frankly, quite frightening. After the incident at my job, I made a deliberate effort to entirely isolate myself from them, and I even changed my personal email address. I also maximized my social media privacy settings, and while it felt like I was residing in a fortress, it seemed essential for my own peace of mind. I concentrated on my work and my plan to buy an apartment, and I actually submitted an offer on a small place, which was accepted. For the first time in months, I felt a genuine sense of forward progress in my own life. That sense of peace was utterly broken last weekend when a cousin of ours was getting married. I was quite reluctant to go to the wedding because I knew my mother and sister would be present. But this cousin is someone I've always held dear, and I didn't want to miss her wedding due to their drama. I thought that we could, as adults, at least act civilly in a public setting for a few hours for our cousin's sake. But this turned out to be a major misjudgment on my part. I arrived at the reception hall and tried my hardest to remain inconspicuous, locating a table with some friends where I tried to simply blend in. I saw my mother and Anna on the other side of the room, and I could sense their gaze on me. For about an hour, nothing occurred, and they remained on their side of the room, while I remained on mine, so I began to relax somewhat. Then, during a calmer moment when the band was taking a break, Anna began walking purposefully towards my table. She held a glass of red wine, and her face wore a stern, angry expression as she approached. My friends at the table all grew tense, as they are aware of parts of the story of what has occurred. Anna halted directly in front of me and said nothing initially. She just gazed at me with an intense expression. Then she began speaking. She said that she had noticed on social media that I was purchasing an apartment, which a mutual friend must have brought up. She then stated that it must be pleasant to be purchasing a home, while she was on the verge of being evicted from my mom's house, because my mom could no longer afford to support her. I did not engage with her provocations, and simply looked at her, informing her that this was neither the time nor the place for this discussion. Her eyes narrowed at my reply, and she declared, "You have no heart. You are just like our father, cold and selfish." The mention of our father, particularly in that context, was a very low blow, and it was the same line my mother had used on me previously, which appears to be their preferred weapon. At that point, I rose from my chair and informed her I was departing, as I did not wish to create a scene at my cousin's wedding. As I turned to step away, she did something I never would have conceived in my wildest dreams, and she hurled her entire glass of red wine all over me. The dark liquid coated the front of my dress, which was a light color, and was instantly and utterly ruined. The entire table gasped in shock, and individuals at nearby tables turned to observe the commotion. I was in shock for a moment, but then an immense amount of anger surged over me, and I turned back to confront her. Before I could say or do anything, she lunged at me and began attempting to scratch at my face, all while shrieking about how I had ruined her life. It was a complete and total public meltdown in the middle of the wedding reception. My friends and a couple of my cousin's groomsmen quickly stood up and managed to pull her off me while she was still screaming and fighting against them. My mother then hurried over, but she didn't come to control her daughter. She came to defend her behavior. She immediately began yelling at me, asking what I had said to provoke Anna, attempting to blame me for being physically assaulted by her. The situation descended into utter chaos, and the bride, my cousin, was in tears watching her wedding be ruined. Her new husband appeared absolutely furious at the disturbance. The wedding was entirely spoiled by their actions. Security from the venue eventually arrived and escorted both Anna and my mother out of the building, and they were yelling insults the entire way. I was left standing there, covered in wine and trembling with anger. My cousin and her husband came over to apologize to me, which was illogical because it wasn't their fault. I told them I was fine and that I was so sorry their special day had been spoiled, by my family. I departed shortly after that. The following day, I had visible scratches on my arms and neck from where Anna had seized me. So I went to the police station. I filed a formal report for assault against her, and I provided them with the names of the witnesses from my table and the contact details for the venue's security team. I am done being passive in this situation, because my sister physically attacked me, and my mother enabled and defended her actions. This is no longer merely a family disagreement about money. It has become a serious matter concerning my personal safety. I have also been in touch with a lawyer about obtaining a restraining order against them, and that process has now commenced. I never in my life imagined that I would be pursuing legal action against my own sister and mother, but their escalating behavior has left me with no other option. They have harassed me, attempted to ruin my career, and now they have physically assaulted me in a public location. There is no turning back from this point, and any prospect of reconciliation, regardless of how remote it might have appeared, is now entirely gone. They have revealed who they truly are, and my priority now is to safeguard myself, both legally and physically. Final update. This will be my last update on this whole matter. The events of the past few months have at last reached their conclusion, though it is by no means a happy one. I am writing this primarily for my own sense of closure and to document the ultimate outcome for anyone who has followed this challenging story. After the assault at my cousin's wedding, I proceeded with the legal actions I had mentioned in my previous post. The police report I filed led to formal charges of assault being filed against my sister, Anna, particularly as there were ample witnesses ready to give statements about what they observed. The legal process is rather slow, yet it is progressing as it ought to. I also managed to secure a restraining order against both Anna and my mother, which a judge approved after hearing my testimony and examining all the evidence I supplied. This evidence comprised the emails they sent to my work, the records of my mother's visit to my office, and the formal police report from the wedding assault. They are now legally obligated to keep their distance from me, my home, and my workplace, and they are forbidden from contacting me either directly or indirectly. It might just be a piece of paper, but it establishes a distinct legal boundary that carries serious repercussions if it's ever breached. The closing on my apartment was completed without any problems, and I now live in my own home. It is a modest space, but it is mine, and more importantly, it is a quiet place of safety, where no one can show up unannounced to bother me. The process of moving and getting everything arranged has been a pleasant diversion from everything else, and it feels like the single good thing to emerge from this whole wretched year. The fallout in our extended family has been somber and disheartening to witness. My mother and Anna have become entirely cut off from everyone, because after the scene they created at the wedding, nobody is supporting them now. My aunts, who were so eager to text me with their disappointment initially, have been utterly quiet. I learned from my cousin that my mom has been calling them, attempting to persuade them to speak to me for her or to loan her funds, but they have all steadfastly declined to get any more involved. Anna's divorce from Derek is now finalized, and just as anticipated, the prenup was applied entirely and thoroughly. She got none of his possessions and no alimony, and I was told she needed to sell the vehicle he had previously gifted her just to cover some of her first legal advice sessions and her fundamental living costs. My mother's financial situation is also not favorable, as she is on a set pension income and plainly cannot manage to support another adult long term. According to my cousin, their relationship has become quite tense, and they are cohabiting in my mom's modest home, where the tension and bitterness are ever present, resulting in regular and noisy disagreements. Anna has evidently made no attempt to seek employment, and she appears to be still hoping for a miraculous remedy to materialize instantly. I have neither seen nor conversed with either of them since the wedding, and my life is considerably calmer now, yet it is also more solitary. My mother and sister, for all their serious flaws, were a significant part of my life, and now that part has been entirely severed. Thank you for reading. Time for another story you won't believe. Hey Reddit, I'm in an odd situation and I'm not sure if I handled things optimally. My fiancée, let's call her Jessica, recently ended our engagement and chose to move overseas. This occurred after her older sister, Susan, who is somewhat of a social media influencer, began spending much time with Jessica and filling her mind with notions about the type of life Jessica ought to be living. Jessica and I had been together for 4 years, engaged for the most recent one. We had a good relationship, I thought. We were saving for a house, planning a future, all the usual things. We had our disagreements like any couple, but nothing significant. I work a stable job, it pays well, and I have solid prospects for promotion. Jessica was employed by a local business. We were content and, I believed, happy. Susan is a few years older than Jessica. She travels extensively, shares photos from luxurious locations, and always appears to be among wealthy people. She refers to herself as a lifestyle guru, or something similar. I always found her a bit excessive, overly concerned with appearances and others' opinions, but she was Jessica's sister, so I was courteous and tried to get along with her. She never seemed to care for me much, always making small remarks about my job not being exciting enough or our town being too small. Roughly 6 months ago, Susan came to stay with her parents for a prolonged visit, meaning she was around us far more often. She began taking Jessica to pricey restaurants, buying her designer clothes I knew Jessica couldn't truly afford on her own, and continually speaking of her impressive life. She would share with Jessica tales of yacht parties, trips to Dubai, and all the significant and affluent individuals she was acquainted with. She started highlighting how Jessica was youthful and attractive and shouldn't settle down so soon. She said Jessica could achieve a far more dazzling and thrilling life compared to what I could provide. At first, Jessica would dismiss it with a laugh or stand up for me in our plans. However, gradually, I observed a shift in her. She began to find fault with our way of life. My job was abruptly dull. Our apartment was too cramped. Our friends were unengaging. She began to contrast all we had and did with Susan's descriptions. She grew fixated on Susan's social media, viewing images of influencers and celebrities, and lamenting that she desired similar experiences. Disputes began shortly thereafter. Jessica would remark that Susan believed I lacked sufficient ambition for her. She said Susan highlighted that my notion of a pleasant holiday involved camping, whereas Jessica ought to be relaxing on a beach in the mountains. Jessica began to suggest that perhaps Susan had a point, that she was compromising. I attempted to reason with her, to remind her of our intentions and of the affection we shared. I explained that Susan's existence, as far as I could tell, was quite shallow and probably financed by a constant search for affluent contacts rather than true accomplishment or contentment. I informed Jessica that a true partnership involved constructing a life side by side, not merely pursuing superficial allure. I was firm about this point. I assured Jessica of my love for her and the life we were creating. I stated I wouldn't apologize for my profession or my aspirations, which centered on steadiness and lasting contentment, not momentary thrills or satisfying an internet following. I also mentioned I believed Susan was a negative influence and prioritized her own reputation, perhaps even aiming to make Jessica a kind of assistant in her influencer sphere, over Jessica's true well-being. This resulted in more significant arguments. Jessica charged me with envying Susan and attempting to dictate her actions. She claimed I was uncertain of myself. Susan naturally fueled the conflict. She would invite Jessica out to escape the unpleasantness following our disagreements. I'm certain she utilized those occasions to further persuade Jessica that I was the issue. Jessica began dedicating increasing amounts of time to Susan and less time at our residence. When she was present, she was remote and frequently on her mobile, browsing travel sites or costly apparel labels Susan had suggested. A fortnight ago, Jessica returned home and informed me she couldn't continue. She mentioned Susan had revealed to her a broader world existed for her, and she needed to depart and encounter it. She said she was ending our engagement and was intending to relocate to Europe, specifically a city renowned for its nightlife and affluent visitors. Susan seemingly had some connections there who could assist her in getting established. Jessica stated I was a decent person, but simply not the suitable partner for her fresh direction in life. She claimed she required someone capable of matching her liveliness and upholding her aspirations for a more opulent lifestyle. I was wounded, clearly, and also angered. However, I did not plead. I didn't propose altering my whole character or profession to attempt to align with some illusions Susan had presented to her. I informed Jessica that I believed she was committing a significant error, that she was pursuing a superficial aspiration that would probably not conclude favorably, and that she was discarding something genuine for something trivial. I also conveyed to her that Susan was exploiting her. Jessica became quite enraged when I uttered that, exclaiming that I understood nothing about her sibling or her genuine desires. She asserted Susan was the sole individual who genuinely comprehended her capabilities. The following day, she commenced packing. I made no attempt to hinder her. I assisted her in transporting boxes to her parents' vehicle when her father arrived to collect her first belongings. I remained composed. I neither shouted nor wept in her presence. I simply informed her that I acknowledged her choice, even if I opposed it, and that I wished her good fortune, although I questioned if she would discover what she sought. She appeared somewhat surprised that I wasn't offering greater resistance. Perhaps she anticipated me to collapse emotionally. Susan was also present, with a knowing smile, instructing Jessica on what to pack and what to leave behind, occasionally remarking on how much unnecessary stuff Jessica had gathered with me. I completely disregarded Susan. Jessica fully departed last week. The apartment feels vacant. Some of our shared friends are astonished. A few of them, those closer to Susan, appear to believe Jessica made the correct choice. My family is distressed for me, but they also think I'm better off without someone so readily influenced. So, Reddit? AITA for not fighting harder for my relationship? Should I have performed elaborate acts, offered her everything, or attempted to persuade her I could become the person Susan desired for her? Part of me feels like if an individual can be swayed to abandon you so simply by a sibling promoting a delusion, then maybe the bond wasn't as firm as I believed, and contesting would have merely extended what was bound to happen, or transformed me into a different person. But another part questions if I relented too readily on someone I cared for. Update 1: 3 months have passed since Jessica departed. I value all the feedback and assessments on my original post. The overall agreement was NTA, and that I managed it as competently as possible considering Jessica's resolve to depart, strongly swayed by her sister Susan. Reviewing your viewpoints assisted me in feeling more confident in my conduct, or rather my lack of action concerning pleading with her to remain. Therefore, what has transpired subsequently? Jessica did, in fact, relocate overseas. From what I've observed as mutual friends occasionally share details or show me Susan's posts, her life immediately appeared to be a string of parties and new acquaintances. Susan accompanied her for the initial few weeks, and her social media was filled with images of them in fashionable clubs, at exclusive gatherings, and with groups of individuals who seemed quite wealthy. Susan made sure to tag everything with ambitious hashtags, often captioning photos with phrases like, "showing my sis how to live her best life," or "freedom looks good on you, Jessica." It was all highly curated, very much in line with Susan's influencer image. Jessica herself posted a few items too, mainly selfies with Susan looking enthusiastic. Approximately a month after her departure, I received a final utility bill for the apartment, which was still under both our names for the closing period. It was higher than typical. Upon investigating, I noticed numerous international calls made from our landline in the days before she moved out, specifically to the country she relocated to. These were lengthy calls, clearly planning conversations. She had never mentioned them and simply left me to handle the bill. It wasn't a vast sum, perhaps a couple of $100, but it was the principle of the matter. She didn't even have the courtesy to settle her own responsibilities before leaving. I paid it and transferred the account solely into my name, but it served as a small, bitter reminder of her exit and the manner in which it was managed. I also had to manage a few subscription services linked to her cards, but billed to our joint address, which she hadn't bothered to cancel or reroute. These were additional minor irritations that indicated her focus was entirely on her fresh, thrilling life, and not at all on the unresolved matters she was leaving for me to handle. A shared acquaintance, someone leaning more towards Jessica's perspective, messaged me roughly 6 weeks ago inquiring if I'd heard from Jessica. I replied no. This individual then mentioned Jessica was enjoying a wonderful time and had numerous, fresh prospects. It seemed like a calculated effort to upset me, or perhaps to assess my response. I simply responded, "Good for her," and let the matter rest. Susan persists in showcasing her opulent lifestyle, though Jessica appears less frequently in her recent updates compared to the first few weeks. Susan's material centers entirely on herself, her latest designer purchases, her journeys, and her influential friends. Jessica occasionally appears in the background of a group photograph, but is no longer the co-lead of Susan's "See How Wonderful Our Life Is" spectacle. I'm not sure if that means anything, but it's an observation. I haven't attempted to reach out to Jessica. I don't feel compelled to. My initial hurt has largely diminished into a sense of disappointment and an awareness that the Jessica I believed I knew might have been a version that existed before Susan's strong influence. Or perhaps she was always prone to this kind of thing, and I simply didn't see it. I'm not expecting her return. I'm building my own life, and it's advancing. I still uphold my decision not to plead or try to change to fit her sister's shallow ideals. If this is the life she desired, then she is welcome to it. To those who asked, I haven't started dating. I'm not actively seeking, just focusing on my personal well-being and letting things happen organically if they are meant to. The calm and quiet, while initially unsettling, has become quite welcome. There are no longer arguments about not being ambitious enough or not wanting to go to fancy parties. My camping gear is being put to good use. Update 2, greetings again, Reddit. It has been approximately 8 months since my initial post, and 5 months since my previous update. Quite a bit has happened, and I find myself questioning if my recent actions were warranted, or too harsh. To summarize briefly for any newcomers, my former fiancée, Jessica, left me for a supposedly glamorous life abroad, heavily influenced by her influencer sister, Susan. I didn't plead with her to stay. She departed, and I started moving forward with my life. In the months after my last update, I kept concentrating on myself. I received a promotion at work, which was excellent. I've been hiking nearly every weekend, and I'm in the best shape I've been in for years. I've truly been feeling quite good, settled, and looking forward. I didn't hear anything directly from Jessica, and Susan's social media presence, which I only ever saw if a mutual friend showed me, remained her usual display of consumerism and supposed fabulousness. Jessica was hardly ever in Susan's posts anymore. It appeared as though she had faded into the background of Susan's world, just as I suspected she might. Then about a month ago, news started filtering through mutual acquaintances that Susan had become engaged. It wasn't a public announcement on her main feed at first. It was more like she was telling select people, and then someone posted a picture from a private engagement party, and the news circulated. Susan was engaged to a very wealthy older businessman she'd apparently been seeing privately for a while. The interesting part was that Jessica was nowhere to be seen in any of the pictures from this engagement party. nor was she mentioned in any of the excited congratulations circulating around Susan's circle. It became quite clear that Susan's new life chapter with her rich fiancé did not prominently feature Jessica. In fact, it seemed Susan had essentially moved on and upgraded her life, leaving Jessica behind. At roughly the same time Susan's engagement news spread more broadly, I began receiving messages from Jessica. It commenced with a straightforward hey in my DMs on a social media platform we hadn't frequently used, but were still linked on. I disregarded it. Then a few days subsequent, another message, "Can we talk?" I disregarded that as well. Subsequently arrived a longer message stating she was enduring a difficult period, that matters weren't as she anticipated, and that she longed for me. I still did not respond. I experienced nothing, no impulse to reply or console her. My sentiments for her had largely evaporated. The messages continued arriving every few days. They began to sound increasingly desperate. She brought up Susan's engagement and expressed feeling forsaken by her sister. She stated Susan had essentially utilized her to make her own life appear more thrilling for a time and then discarded her when this affluent man appeared. She implied that her financial circumstances overseas were unfavorable and that the party lifestyle had lost its allure very rapidly once Susan's support and connections vanished. She admitted she made an error. I still did not reply to any of these communications. I discussed it with a close friend, who affirmed I owed her nothing. To any of these communications, I discussed it with a close friend, who affirmed I owed her nothing. My rationale was that she made her choices abundantly clear. She opted for Susan's vision over our reality. The repercussions of that choice, including being forsaken by the very sister who guided her down that path, were hers to manage. Susan, in the meantime, at last made a significant public announcement of her engagement on her primary social media. It was as extravagant and excessive as one would anticipate, filled with professional photographs, effusive captions concerning her king and their burgeoning empire. Naturally, there was no mention of Jessica. Indeed, a day or two following her engagement post, Susan shared some vague, philosophical-sounding nonsense about outgrowing people and leaving behind those who don't align with your highest self. It seemed like a highly pointed public rejection of anyone she no longer found useful, and I couldn't help but consider it was indirectly directed at Jessica. After witnessing Susan's engagement posts and her subsequent leaving people behind rubbish, combined with Jessica's progressively desperate messages portraying a situation of being utilized and abandoned by her own sister, I reached a decision. I accessed all my social media platforms and blocked both Jessica and Susan. I also blocked their phone numbers. My rationale is that I wish to entirely conclude that phase of my life. Jessica's messages were evolving into a potential source of drama I wish to avoid. Susan's complete online presence is something I deem disagreeable, and I have no wish to view any more of it, even unintentionally. I am progressing, and I believe that blocking them was an essential measure to safeguard my own tranquility and avert any future endeavors to involve me in their turmoil. I don't wish Jessica ill exactly, but I also don't feel accountable for her current predicament. She walked away, and I allowed her to. Now I am moving further away myself. Update 3. It has been about 4 months since I blocked Jessica and Susan. Life kept getting better for me. The most significant development is that I began dating someone. Her name is Carla, and she's wonderful. She's a veterinarian, kind, funny, down to earth, and shares my love for the outdoors. We met through a mutual friend at a hiking group meetup. It was unexpected, but it felt right. Our relationship has been progressing at a comfortable pace, and it's founded on mutual respect and genuine affection. A stark contrast to the drama and superficiality that came to define the end of my relationship with Jessica. Carla knows about my past with Jessica, not in extreme detail, but she knows I had a difficult breakup and an ex-fiancé who left. She's been very understanding. 2 weeks ago, the past came knocking. Literally. I was at home on a Saturday afternoon, and my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. It was Jessica. She looked different. I considered not opening the door, but I decided it was better to confront it, head on and get it over with. I opened it. She looked surprised that I answered, then her face sort of crumpled. Before I could say much, she began speaking, a flood of words. She said she was back in the country, that things overseas had been a disaster after Susan got engaged and essentially cut her off. She stated Susan had entirely deserted her, altered her contact information, and even instructed shared acquaintances not to assist Jessica. She asserted Susan had utilized her as a social accessory and then cast her aside. She continued to explain that the funds were depleted, the acquaintances vanished, and the party scene was unpleasant and solitary. She began weeping, saying she'd made a dreadful error, the gravest mistake of her existence. She said she understood I was the only one who ever genuinely cherished her, and that she was unwise and childish to heed Susan's advice. She said Susan had corrupted her perception of me. Then she did what I had a premonition she would do. She implored me for another chance. She said she'd do anything to compensate me, that she loved me, that she believed we could rediscover happiness. It was a complete emotional collapse on my doorstep. I listened, composedly. When she finally momentarily ceased speaking, I told her unequivocally that I was sorry she had such an unpleasant ordeal, but that there was no possibility of our reconciliation. I told her that I had entirely progressed with my existence. I told her that her decisions carried repercussions, and while it was regrettable that Susan had dealt with her so unkindly, Jessica had also made the choice to trust Susan, to abandon our partnership, and to depart. I recalled to her that Jessica had also made the choice to trust Susan, to abandon our partnership, and to depart. I reminded her that she had appeared entirely content with her choice when she left, and that her sudden remorse, now that her new life had fallen apart, didn't alter what she had done. Then I informed her I was dating someone else, someone I was very content with. Her manner shifted immediately. The crying ceased and her expression grew stern. The sense of entitlement Susan had cultivated in her surged to the forefront. She grew furious. She accused me of progressing too rapidly, inquiring if our 4 years together held no significance for me. She stated I should have awaited her, that I owed her an opportunity to rectify matters. She then possessed the nerve to ask who Carla was, and to assert that this new individual could not possibly comprehend me as she did, and that I was likely merely settling for an inferior choice out of resentment. She began to elevate her voice, accusing me of being heartless and insensitive for not accepting her back when she was clearly in distress. She even stated I never truly loved her if I could simply cast her aside like this. The irony, it seemed, was lost on her. I held my position. I informed her that my current relationship was not her concern, and that I would not permit her to insult Carla. I repeated that her actions carried consequences, and that my current relationship was not her concern, and that I would not allow her to insult Carla. I reaffirmed that her actions had consequences, and that I was no longer accountable for her happiness or her difficulties. I stated that her present suffering stemmed directly from her choices and Susan's influence, which she had readily accepted. I informed her I wished for her to depart from my property. She began to grow more agitated, nearly hysterical, claiming she had no place to go, that her parents were displeased with her, and that Susan was a monster. She attempted to seize my arm, pleading, but I moved away. The disagreement was growing explosive, and I was keenly aware of my neighbors. I stated to her firmly that if she did not depart, I would contact the police. That appeared to register with her. She began weeping again, a distinct type of cry this time, more akin to angry frustration. She hissed out something about me being heartless and then turned and departed, appearing defeated and furious simultaneously. I shut the door. It was disagreeable, but it affirmed that I had made the correct decision in moving forward and in blocking her beforehand. I informed Carla about it later that day. She was remarkably supportive and understanding. She stated I managed it well and that I had every right to safeguard my present happiness. This entire episode has only made me appreciate Carla more and strengthened my desire to build a future with her, far from the toxicity of Jessica and Susan. Final update, hello Reddit. This will be my final update on this ongoing narrative. It's been about 6 months since Jessica appeared on my doorstep. Thank you all for keeping up and for your counsel. It's been useful to express these occurrences. Following the confrontation at my apartment, Jessica did not depart quietly. Her desperation and entitlement seemed to intensify. A few days after I had turned her away, Carla and I had dinner at a local restaurant we often visit. Jessica appeared. She must have been observing me or discovered where I regularly go. She approached our table and began creating a disturbance. She began loudly accusing me of abandoning her in her time of need, calling me names, and then she turned on Carla, saying horrible insults to her, calling Carla a homewrecker, which is absurd, as my relationship with Jessica was long over before I even met Carla, and making disparaging comments about her looks. It was remarkably embarrassing and distressing. Carla was stunned, but managed it with impressive composure, proposing we depart. Jessica attempted to obstruct my path as I rose, seizing my arm once more, and this time she was yelling. The restaurant manager was forced to step in and request Jessica to depart. She exited furiously, but not without shouting that I would regret this, and that I was indebted to her. The torment did not cease there. For several weeks, I got a flood of calls from unidentified numbers, which I presumed were hers. Whenever I answered, it would either be quiet or Jessica weeping and pleading, then swiftly shifting to rage and insults when I refused to interact. She also attempted to reach my friends and family, portraying herself as a casualty and me as the antagonist who abandoned her after she committed a minor error. Fortunately, my friends and family were aware of the true account, or at least a sufficient portion of it, and did not interact with her. The most unsettling event involved Carla. Jessica somehow discovered Carla's workplace. Jessica visited there, purportedly with a fictitious sick animal, and when she secured a moment with Carla, she endeavored to persuade her that I was a dreadful individual, a schemer, and that I remained in love with Jessica and was exploiting Carla. Carla is intelligent. She discerned the truth immediately and instructed Jessica to vacate the property and not return. Carla was disturbed by this, and it incensed me. This went beyond acceptable limits. Subsequent to the occurrence at Carla's place of employment, I sought legal counsel. We dispatched Jessica a formal cease and desist letter, outlining her harassment and cautioning her of legal proceedings if it persisted. I also recorded every detail. Throughout this period, my bond with Carla only grew stronger. We mutually supported each other throughout this difficult period. Her composed strength and steadfast backing for me, despite being drawn into this drama, were remarkable. We began formulating significant plans for our future together, viewing homes, discussing marriage, the very things I once planned with Jessica. But this time it felt genuine, wholesome, and established on a basis of true partnership. Approximately 2 months ago, Jessica undertook one final, desperate effort. She reached out to my parents directly, appearing at their residence without warning. She was weeping, disarrayed, and recounted a highly dramatic tale about being impoverished and without shelter, all because I would not forgive her. She implored them to persuade me to reconcile or at least assist her monetarily. My parents are compassionate individuals, and they felt pity for her condition, but they are also aware of what I endured and how content I am now with Carla. They provided her with some funds for a meal and a temporary accommodation, but they also resolutely informed her that my life belonged to me, that I had progressed, and that she needed to cease troubling me and Carla. They told her she needed to obtain assistance from her own family, including Susan or expert aid. Jessica evidently experienced an emotional collapse right there in their driveway. She shrieked, she wept, she cast the money aside, claiming it was insufficient and that they were just as unfeeling as I was. It was a further volatile response. My dad had to firmly instruct her to depart before he summoned the authorities. She ultimately departed. That was the last direct contact any of us have had with her. I learned through rumor that Jessica ultimately returned to her parents' city, but is not residing with them. She is seemingly struggling, employed in a low-paying job, and is quite isolated. Susan is now married, leading a very prosperous life, and has made no public or private attempts to assist her sister. Their relationship is evidently non-existent. The final story for today. I'm 28 now, but this whole situation began when I was around 17, preparing to complete high school, and ideally attend college. Growing up, I always knew money was something we needed to be cautious with, but my parents always told me and my older sister Nancy that they would back our education as far as they were able. My grandparents, my mother's parents, had actually set up a college fund for me at my birth, and they contributed funds to it consistently. And as I got older and started working part-time jobs during high school, I added a good portion of my own earnings to it as well, since I truly wished to attend a good university and study engineering, knowing it would be costly. This fund represented my greatest hope, my passage to a future I truly desired, and I knew it would be expensive. This fund represented my greatest hope, my passage to a future I truly desired, and I checked the balance occasionally, watching its growth, feeling proud and secure. My sister Nancy, who is 3 years my senior, didn't share my academic aspirations, which was perfectly fine. She sought different paths in life. She found employment after high school, and then when she was approximately 22, she became engaged to her boyfriend, John. Everyone was quite thrilled, especially my mother. Initially, they discussed a small, modest wedding, something they could manage financially, and John's family intended to provide some support as well. I truly felt happy for her, even though Nancy and I were never extremely close. She was still my sister. But then the wedding plans began to shift. Nancy began discussing far grander concepts, a more elaborate venue, a costlier dress, a larger guest list, and an extensive honeymoon. My mom appeared caught up in it all, declaring that Nancy merited the finest, as it was her momentous occasion. Initially, I didn't focus heavily on it because I was in my last year of high school, preoccupied with exams and college applications, and solely concentrated on my personal future. I heard them discussing finances at times, and my mom would appear anxious, while my dad would remain silent, which was typical for him when mom became agitated by something. On 1 or 2 occasions, my mom inquired if I could loan them some money, just minor sums, stating it was for expenses or similar needs, and that she'd reimburse me, but she never followed through, and I somewhat overlooked it because I was extremely occupied. I remember her also uttering remarks like, "Oh, you've got your savings. You're all set," in a way that seemed slightly odd, but I just dismissed it, assuming she was merely broadly worried about all the wedding costs. The wedding took place, and it was enormous, far grander than anything I believed they could manage. Nancy appeared regal, and my mom was radiant, but I remember sensing a slight unease within me, observing the evident expenditure and recalling my mom's apparent stress. But once more, I told myself it wasn't my concern, and perhaps John's family had covered most of it, or perhaps my parents had taken out a loan. A few months following the wedding, my college acceptance letters began arriving, and I was admitted to my top choice university for engineering. I was so incredibly thrilled. I rushed around the house showing my parents the letter, and they expressed pride, but there was something slightly amiss about their response, a bit subdued. I didn't dwell on it. I was simply so eager to begin this new phase. The university required a deposit to secure my spot, and then the initial tuition payment would be due shortly thereafter. So I went to the bank, the one holding my college fund, the fund my grandparents initiated, and to which I contributed, feeling completely mature and responsible, prepared to take the first significant stride toward my future. I sat down with the bank teller and requested to make a withdrawal for the deposit. She typed something into her computer, then she frowned slightly, and then she typed a bit more. She asked me to reconfirm my identity, which I did. Then she informed me of the account's balance. It was nearly depleted. There was something like $100 in there, perhaps less. I simply stared at her. I thought she had made an error, that she was viewing the incorrect account. I told her that couldn't be accurate, that there was supposed to be tens of thousands of dollars in that account. Money I had saved, money my grandparents had placed there for my college. She appeared uneasy and stated that the records indicated several substantial withdrawals had occurred over the past few months by the other authorized signers on the account. I inquired who, and she confirmed it, my mother and my father. I felt as if I couldn't breathe. I thanked her, I don't know how, and I exited the bank feeling as though the world had just tipped on its side. I returned home, trembling, so confused and frightened, and a terrible sensation was beginning to build in my stomach. I found my parents in the living room, watching TV as if nothing was amiss. I asked them about the money, about my college fund. Initially, they attempted to evade the question. My mom said something about how we'd discuss it later, that I shouldn't worry. But I pressed them. I think I was starting to raise my voice. And I told them what the bank had said, that the money was gone, and they had taken it. And then they confessed. They told me they had utilized my college fund to cover Nancy's wedding. My mom began weeping and said that Nancy had desired such a special day, and they didn't know any other way to afford it. And the cost just kept escalating. She claimed they intended to repay it, somehow eventually, before I required it, but they simply hadn't managed to. My dad just sat there, looking down, not speaking much, just that they believed they were doing the correct thing for Nancy. I simply broke down. I began shouting. I was screaming at them, asking them how they could do that to me, how they could rob me of my future. I told them that money was for my education, that my grandparents had saved for me, that I had earned it. I asked them if Nancy's wedding, a single day of ostentation, was more important than my entire future, my career, everything I had strived for. My mom kept asserting that I was being self-centered, that Nancy deserved that wedding, and that family supports family. She suggested I could always attend a more affordable local college, or work for a couple of years and save up again. She said I was intelligent. I'd find a way. Nancy, who happened to arrive during this commotion, offered no assistance. She interjected, saying I was overreacting, that it was merely money, and her wedding was a once-in-a-lifetime event, and that they'd repay me eventually. So what was the major issue? She even claimed I was attempting to spoil her happiness. The dispute was immense. I was yelling. My mom was yelling and crying. Nancy was yelling at me for upsetting Mom. And my dad just sat there looking dejected, but not defending me, not at all. I told them they had betrayed me, that they didn't care about me, only Nancy. I remember screaming that I detested them, that they had ruined everything. I packed a small bag that night with some clothes and my essential documents, and I departed. I stayed at a friend's house for several days, just feeling numb. The immediate fallout was terrible. I couldn't attend my dream university. I couldn't even attend any university that year. The deposit deadline passed. I had no funds, no assistance. My friend's parents were kind, but I couldn't remain there indefinitely. I located an inexpensive room to rent, and I secured a second job, laboring in a factory at night and in a diner during the day. I was constantly exhausted. I postponed my college plans indefinitely. My parents attempted to call me a few times, and Nancy sent a few angry texts, asserting I was fracturing the family by being so theatrical and unforgiving. I blocked all their numbers. I didn't wish to hear their justifications or their accusations. They stole from me. They stole my future as I had envisioned it, and they demonstrated precisely how much I mattered to them. It took me years to recover. I eventually managed to attend a local community college, taking evening classes while working, and then transferred to a state university, incurring substantial student loans and working ceaselessly. It was far more difficult than it needed to be. I earned my engineering degree, but much later than anticipated, and with a significant amount of debt that I'm still settling. I established a life for myself, independently. I now have my own small apartment, a respectable job, but it was a long, arduous battle, and I carry considerable anger and bitterness from that period. I haven't communicated with my parents or my sister in approximately 10 years. I learned through a distant cousin a few years ago that Nancy and John had a couple of children, but I didn't inquire for specifics. So let's jump ahead to last week. I was at home after work, preparing dinner, when there was a knock at my door. I wasn't expecting any visitors. I peered through the peephole and my heart instantly sank. It was my parents. They appeared older, weary, and deeply distressed. My mom was weeping. I paused for a long moment, but then I opened the door, just a sliver, with the chain still engaged. My mom started speaking immediately, her voice thick with tears, saying they needed me, that they were desperate. My dad was simply standing behind her, looking helpless. She informed me that Nancy had departed. She had simply packed a bag and left her husband and her 2 children, who were apparently about 5 and 7 years old. She said John, Nancy's husband, was distraught and couldn't manage, and he essentially left the children with my parents, claiming he couldn't handle them alone and needed to sort out his own life. My parents are older now, in their late 60s, and they mentioned they don't have the energy or the money to raise 2 young children. My mom was weeping and saying they didn't know what to do, and then she uttered it. She said, "You have to help us. Your family. And family always comes first. These are your nibblings, your family's blood." She mentioned they were hoping I could take the children in, or at least assist them financially, substantially, to care for them. I simply gazed at them. All that old fury, that betrayal, it simply came flooding back so intensely, it felt like I was 17 again, standing in the bank. All I could ponder was my college fund, my snatched dreams, the years I labored, the debt I'm still in, all because they believed Nancy's lavish wedding was more important. And now, after 10 years of quiet, after they utterly destroyed my trust and my plans for my future, they appear expecting me to sacrifice my life again for Nancy's obligations. They appear expecting me to sacrifice my life again for Nancy's obligations because family always comes first. The pretense was simply staggering. I didn't shout this time. I simply felt cold. I told them that they had made their choices a long time ago about what family meant, and that they had shown me exactly where I stood in that family. I told them they had spent my future on Nancy, so Nancy and they could figure this out. I told them I had nothing for them. Then I shut the door on them, just as my mom was still weeping and pleading. I heard her lament outside for a while, and then they departed. Ever since, I've been a mess. I feel a sense of guilt sometimes when I consider the children. They're innocent in all of this. But then I reflect on what my family did to me, how they simply cast me aside, and the fury returns. My parents have attempted to call me, at times growing angry and labeling me heartless. I haven't responded. I'm unsure if I acted correctly. A part of me feels vindicated, but another part questions if I'm being a cold-hearted asshole for not assisting with the children, for abandoning my family when they are in crisis. So, Reddit, am I the asshole for shutting the door on my parents and declining to help them raise my sister's abandoned children after they used my entire college fund on her wedding years ago and I broke contact? Update 1. Hello, everyone. Firstly, I wish to thank you all for the comments and messages on my initial post. I've gone through so many of them, and it's been a great deal to process. I hadn't anticipated so many individuals would respond, and it's provided me much to consider, even if most of it merely affirmed what I was already sensing. Many of you requested clarifications, so I'll attempt to address some of the frequent questions. The college fund was considerable. My grandparents had contributed a considerable sum over the years, and with my earnings from working nearly full-time hours, certain summers and part-time during school, it was approximately $60,000. This was during the early 2010s, so it would have covered a substantial part of my tuition, room, and board at the state university I intended to attend for all 4 years, or at least made a significant reduction in it, implying I would have graduated with little to no debt. It was all in a shared savings account that my parents could access, which I now realize was an enormous error, but I was young and had faith in them. Nancy's wedding was remarkably lavish given their income. From what I recall and what I later gathered from the vast sum of money that disappeared, it was a large venue, a bespoke designer-style dress, or a highly priced copy, a seated dinner for over 150 people, an open bar, a live band, and a 2-week honeymoon in Hawaii. It was the type of wedding you witness in magazines, not something my parents, who were a teacher's aide, mom, and an intermediate-level office worker, dad, could possibly have afforded without, well, my money. Concerning any apologies or efforts at reimbursement over the years, there were none. Zero. After the initial confrontation when I uncovered the theft, their efforts to reach me were primarily to inform me I was exaggerating, or that I should pardon them for the sake of family ties, or that I was acting cruelly by severing ties with them. Nancy, as I stated, was even worse, telling me I was self-centered and attempting to make her feel awful about her perfect day. Not once did any of them say, "We are so sorry. What we did was wrong. How can we start to make this right?" It was always about how my reaction was the problem, not their actions. Therefore, no, they never repaid a single cent, nor did they ever propose to, not in any earnest manner. The "will pay you back eventually" was merely something they uttered in the heat of the moment to attempt to soothe me, with no genuine scheme or purpose behind it. That was evident. Regarding my current financial and living situation, I'm managing adequately, but I'm not wealthy. I hold a respectable engineering position, but I reside in an area with a high cost of living. I possess my own modest apartment, a dependable car, and I can cover my bills, but I also carry a substantial amount of student loan debt that I'm still conscientiously settling each month. That $60,000 they took would have made a monumental difference to my life, not just back then, but even now. The idea of assuming the financial responsibility for 2 children is simply inconceivable. I'm barely comfortable managing my own life and debts after what they did. Concerning Nancy and her children, from what my parents divulged on my doorstep, Nancy seemingly just departed. She informed John she was discontent and needed to discover herself, or something indistinct of that nature. They didn't know where she went. The children are, as I stated, young. I believe the boy is 7 and the girl is 5. It's a dreadful situation for them, and I genuinely sympathize with them as children. I truly do. They are innocent. Since I closed the door on my parents, they have been unrelenting. They've called me several times daily. I've been allowing it to go to voicemail. The messages are a combination of my mom weeping and pleading with me to simply speak to them, telling me the children are inquiring about their mother and are bewildered, and my dad, at times, taking the phone, and with a firmer tone informing me I bear a moral duty, that I'm being unresponsive and callous, and that I will regret this. They've also begun texting about the difficulty they face, how they are unprepared for this, how their well-being is deteriorating from the strain. One evening last week, I was returning home from work, and they were parked in their car down the street from my apartment building, waiting. My mom exited and attempted to approach me while I was heading to my entrance. I simply turned around, returned to my car, and drove to a friend's place for the evening. I didn't want a further confrontation at that spot. It angered me that they attempted to ambush me in that manner. It seemed as though they were tracking me. Going through all your comments, particularly the NTA verdicts, assisted in reinforcing what I already sensed. The predominant feeling was that their previous deeds relinquished any claim to request assistance from me presently, especially wielding family as a tool, when they demonstrated such scant consideration for me as family when it was convenient for them. Many of you noted that they are trying to make me responsible for Nancy's failures and their own past terrible decisions. My internal reasoning hasn't truly changed. I'm still incredibly angry about the college fund. That was a deep betrayal, and it's not something I can simply forget, because they're in a tough spot now. A tough spot created by the same daughter they prioritized over me to such a devastating extent. If I help them now, what message does that convey? That I'll always be there to clean up their messes, no matter how poorly they've treated me. That my money, my life, my resources are just there for the taking when they deem it necessary. I cannot do it. The thought of those children tugs at something in me, I won't lie. But it's not enough to make me destroy the life I've painstakingly built for myself. A life I had to build because of their actions. I haven't responded to any of their calls or texts. I'm considering changing my phone number, though I know they know where I live now. I'm also thinking about what legal steps I might need to take if they continue to harass me, as some of you suggested, like sending a cease and desist letter. It feels extreme, but their persistence is starting to feel like harassment. So for now, my decision stands. I am not helping them. It's a tough stance, and it doesn't leave me feeling good. It makes me feel stressed, angry, and sorrowful that things have reached this point. But I don't perceive another option that doesn't entail me sacrificing myself repeatedly. I sense they're attempting to pull me back into a harmful dynamic that almost shattered me before. I won't permit that to occur. I thank you all once more for reading and for your contributions. It's assisted me in feeling less isolated in this situation. Update 2. Hello everyone once more. This is a further update, approximately a month following my previous one. I appreciate the ongoing messages of encouragement. I had wished that my choice would conclude the matter, that they would simply leave me in peace. They did not. After their visit to my house, they began leaving voicemails on my phone. I didn't hear them out. I simply erased them. They consistently came from my mom. Then, approximately 2 weeks prior, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. I was anticipating calls for work, so I made the error of answering it. It was my aunt, my mother's sister. She initiated the conversation by stating she understood I didn't wish to speak with my mom, but that she felt compelled to call me because the situation was becoming dire. I was on the verge of hanging up, but she simply began speaking, and I became still. She informed me that my parents were entirely unraveling. She mentioned my dad's cardiac condition was worsening from the stress, and that my mom cries all day. She said they can barely manage to get the children fed and dressed, that the house was a mess, and that they were running out of what little money they had. She went on and on about how Nancy was in a terrible state, that she had gotten mixed up with some bad people, and that the kids were innocent and were asking about their mom and dad. Then she took a breath, and her tone changed. She told me that I was being cold and cruel. She said she knew what happened with the college. Money was wrong, but that my parents made a terrible error under pressure and that they loved me. She asked me if I could truly live with myself, knowing my actions could lead to 2 small children, my family's blood, ending up in the foster care system. She yelled into the phone, asking if I was truly going to let that happen, just because I couldn't let go of something that happened ages ago. Something inside me just snapped. All that quiet resolve I thought I had just evaporated. I started yelling right back into the phone. I told her that they didn't merely make a mistake. They made a deliberate choice, repeatedly for months, to steal my future and give it to my sister for a party. I shouted at her, my voice cracking, that I was practically in the foster system myself at 18, that I was homeless and had to rely on the charity of a friend's family to not end up on the street. I screamed at her, "Where were you then? Where was all this talk about family being a priority when I was eating ramen noodles every night and working until my hands bled? It appears family only matters when you need something from me." I told her that it wasn't my actions that would place those children in foster care. It was Nancy's for abandoning them and my parents, for enabling her whole life, creating the person she became. I told her that they are the ones disappointing the children, not me. I concluded by telling her to never, ever contact me again. I told her to relay the message to my parents that if any of them appeared at my house again, I would not hesitate to call the police or harassment. Then I ended the call. I stood in my kitchen for a long time afterward, just trembling. I spent the remainder of the day blocking her number, my parents' numbers, and any other number of any relative I could recall. I simply felt ill. The argument didn't resolve anything. It simply made everything feel worse. Update, merely felt ill. The argument didn't resolve anything. It simply made everything feel worse. Update 3. Hello. It's been approximately 2 years since my last post. I imagine most people who read my story have long since forgotten about it. But I felt I needed to write this one last time. This is for my own closure, and for anyone who has ever invested in the events. Much has occurred, and none of it is good. As I promised myself, I maintained absolute no contact. The year after that dreadful phone call with my aunt, I got a job offer in a city roughly 4 hours away. I took it. I sold my modest apartment, packed my belongings, and moved. I didn't tell anyone in my family where I was going. I got a new phone number. For roughly a year, I heard nothing. There was peace. I thought that was the end of the story. Then a few months ago, I was in a spacious grocery store in my new city, and I heard someone call my name. I turned around and noticed a cousin from my father's side of the family, a man named Matt. We were never close, but we were always amicable as children. He was in town for a conference. He was shocked to see me, and I was shocked to see him. He didn't know the complete details of why I left, only that there had been a massive family blow-up. We ended up getting coffee, and he informed me about everything that had occurred in the last 2 years. My parents couldn't cope with the children. Just as my aunt had mentioned, their health entirely deteriorated under the pressure. My father had a minor heart attack approximately 6 months after I last communicated with him. My mother simply couldn't manage 2 traumatized, energetic young children by herself. Eventually, a neighbor contacted Child Protective Services. After an investigation, the children were taken from their care and placed into the foster system. Losing the children broke what was left of my parents. They eventually had to sell the house I grew up in. They could no longer afford the upkeep. Matt informed me they now reside in a compact, 1-bedroom subsidized apartment for low-income seniors. He also informed me about Nancy. She was located approximately a year ago. She has extremely severe addiction problems, in addition to other mental health issues. She's been in and out of court-ordered rehabilitation and has encountered some minor legal difficulties. She has no residence, no employment, and no contact with her children. The state ended her and Nancy's husband's parental rights. The children, my niece and nephew, are still in the foster care system. The positive news, if one can call it that, is that they were kept together. Matt mentioned my parents attempted to visit them initially, but the visits were frequently halted because they were too emotional, and it was considered too disruptive and distressing for the children. They hardly see them now. So that concludes the story. Everyone lost. My parents ruined their son's future for their daughter's wedding, and ultimately they lost their daughter, their residence, their grandchildren, and their son. My sister received her fairy tale wedding, and it resulted in a life that is an absolute nightmare. Her children are growing up without parents, as orphans whose parents are still alive. Thank you for reading.